the final session, I have a couple of just very general questions that I will ask all of the panelists to comment on, and then we'll open it up for some questions from the audience. But if you'll permit me just a moment to say a couple of words of gratitude before we do the panel. It's really, when I started graduate school here at Princeton in 1998, I don't think I ever could have dreamed that I would be here doing an event such as this. I'm extremely grateful to the Princeton Theological Seminary for my job and for the classes that I'm able to teach and the wonderful students that I have met here. President Craig Barnes of the seminary was not able to be with us today. However, every time I have met with him and discussed with him the teaching I do here and the activities of Scala, he has been extremely supportive and has expressed a great interest in there being greater collaboration between the seminary and the university, and in particular with the Catholic community at the university. Father Tom Malelli, who was the chaplain at Aquinas when I was a graduate student, is a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary. He's also still involved in chaplaincy. So I think this hopefully will be the beginning of a very fruitful collaboration with Aquinas. And of course, I'm very grateful to RJ and to the Timothy Institute for their financial support of this event, as well as to the many benefactors of Scala who have made this possible. I had contact with many of my benefactors this week because I finally got around to sending them their tax-exempt letters. And I told them how excited I was about this conference, and it just really moved me to get so many emails back from people saying how excited they were to be supporting this kind of an event. And they, the only people I will name are the parents of my former student, John Artunian, who passed away in March. And when I wrote to his parents, they sent me this beautiful email back about how much it means to them that you're all here. So that really made me very happy. I will also just make a little plug, especially now that the schedules between the seminary and the university will line up starting in the next academic year. I think oftentimes students on the two campuses don't realize how many opportunities there are to take classes on the other campus. So for undergraduate students or even graduate students at the university, please look out for my classes on philosophy of social science, religion and resilience, Christianity and liberal arts, aesthetics. Dr. Fred Simmons teaches classes here. He's here in the audience. His classes are wonderful. I highly recommend them. Seminary students, there are classes at the university that you could certainly find out about. Marcus Gibson was here or is here. There's Marcus. I think there's going to be even greater opportunities for cross-pollination and having students from both campuses taking classes together. So that would be a welcome thing. Scala is going to be running, Scala does dinners and activities, and there will be a reading group run by Dr. Simmons the next few weeks that you're all invited to. You should have heard about it. If not, we'll make sure you did. So there's plenty of opportunities to stay involved. So that's mostly what I wanted to say out of gratitude. Also to my staff on the ground, I'm incredibly grateful to Michael Paul Cartledge, who's probably at home putting his 4 kids to bed so he can come back to dinner tonight. He has been my right-hand man in Scala. He's a graduate student. He does all the website, the poster design, and he's a fantastic PhD student and research assistant to boot. I couldn't be luckier. Bess is here from Virginia. She's our videographer and our photographer and a social media genius. So I'm very grateful for all of her enthusiasm and help. And Dan Warnberg is my sort of boots on the ground, Mr. Enthusiasm, and spreads the word about everything. And his sidekick, Jackson, a guy from West Texas with a pickup truck, and knows how to get stuff done. You need one of those on your team always. So thank you to you guys for making all this happen, and thanks to the staff of the Princeton Theological Seminary and Conference Services for really making this pretty easy for me. Now on to serious matters. A simple question for all of you to get us going, and then let's see where the discussion goes. As I was listening to the presentations, I think there's many overarching questions, but there was a common theme, I think, across all of the presentations, a critique of sentimentalism around discussions of love and friendship and happiness, and I think also a critique of what Robert Bella and others have called the therapeutic culture. So I wondered if the panelists would just comment on or talk about whether or not it's important to think about or understand what are the philosophical and theological or perhaps psychological roots of this sentimentalism and the therapeutic culture, and is it important to actually contend with the intellectual ideas behind that culture and put them side by side with some of the ideas that you were talking about. And along with that, I think my other question, and really this gets to the reason why I started Scala. I mean, I started Scala because having taught at Yale and actually lived in a student residence, Calhoun College, I noticed all of the problems that we've been talking about young people. And I just wonder, kind of, how do we go from a philosophical or theological understanding of the roots of the problem, the response to the problem, to actually creating the kinds of communities and institutions that provide an alternative or a moral exemplar of life and community that pushes back against the sentimentalism and the therapeutic culture. So, in brief summary, kind of what are the philosophical, theological, psychological, intellectual roots of this sentimentalism and the therapeutic culture? And what are some concrete, practical responses that provide a way of drawing people into a different way of thinking about friendship?
I don't mind jumping in. My answer will probably be the least informative, so I'll go first and give others a chance. So one thing that strikes me when you were asking this question, the thing that came to my mind is that, is this on? The thing that came to my mind is just how much young people especially are trying to do on their own, how much they're trying to make sense of things on their own, particularly with respect to love, dating, relationships. I'm pretty sure that one young woman in my life, whose name I will not mention, her relationship I will not mention, I think she gets most of her relationship advice from Reddit. And she's sort of, I'm not joking, right? Things were not necessarily modeled well for her in her home. She doesn't have a lot of other models. And so it's pretty clear to me that she spends hours on the internet just trying to figure out, like, what do I do when my parents treat me badly? How do I relate to, my boyfriend? And it's just so much sharing of ignorance. So on the one hand, yeah, I think it's really fantastic for people to be at places like Princeton Seminary taking their classes, or in the core humanities program, in the humanities department, or my own university, my own department in Catholic Studies, learning and thinking about these issues. But I also think we just need to find ways to provide people with really robust models, right? So not just receiving a theoretical account of how these things should work, but having people in their lives that they can look to, so that they're not just sort of trying to make sense of these things, in isolation, scrolling through their phone, scrolling through Reddit.
I should do as my neighbor has done, since we know that my voice won't carry. So, in one sense, the critique of a therapeutic culture that undermines a larger sense of mind, plays on the sentimentalism, I think needs to be addressed. And it can be addressed in various ways at the pastoral level, but also at the mental health level. What is needed is, of course, the models aren't the only solution, but a more complex anthropology, philosophical, theological, and psychological anthropology that sees more than the sentiment, and sees the sentiment, our sentiments or our desires or our love of desire for more of what they are. I think sentimentalism, the critique of it, shouldn't say less emotions. It's actually more, in terms of the more that is the context for better understanding emotions, better understanding our desires, better understanding also the way that we can flourish if those desires are put within the context of understanding relationships which involve the deeper loves. These deeper loves that Augustine gives us a modeling for those various ways we've touched on in our talks. But the corrections of sentimentalism, it seems to me, involves a larger anthropology that then is put into practice. And the psychologists that I'm working with at the Institute for the Psychological Sciences are doing just that, trying to see more than the sentiment, without denying the sentiment, trying to see more, and making your own therapists good at calling out the qualities of love that are, if you will, ones that make sense out of our desires. The benevolence, the self-gift, brings into context, I think, something that we might often miss. Maybe one point that's anthropological, but I think also very practical, is significant, is that if we differentiate charity and benevolence from, which is on the love or desire. We have to be careful to realize in reality there is this constant movement back and forth of the wholeness of the person that we're pointing to. And it's the wholeness of the person that then does also, where the will and the emotions that we've been playing with, continue to go back and forth. When we're choosing, we feel when we choose. So we have a desire that comes alive also in the other direction. We choose when we feel. And that kind of nuance, which is so important for the wholeness of the person, I think, can be translated into pastoral work, can be translated into mental health practice, in ways that help people, practitioners, to see more and to, in one sense, have a truer vision of the person's hearts.
So, it's like the time of the day where my mind goes blank. But to follow from Erica's comments, I think that the young people I come into contact with, yes, on the one hand, they're kind of grasping for guidance, and there isn't guidance out there. And yet, on the other hand, they do walk into my classroom being shaped in all sorts of challenging ways, in ways that they aren't able to articulate for themselves. So it's shaped by the sentimentalist therapeutic culture for sure. And yet with an innate sense that it's not enough. And so I find students pretty surprisingly open, especially I think what I've found lately, I'm thinking about this lately, and I think this is true, so I'm not sure, but I do think this is true. Nobody's talking about suffering, and part of the corruption of our culture is that we all kind of walk around pretending that everything's perfect all the time, and it's a real burden. And you start to talk about suffering in the classroom, and it's a gateway into a new vocabulary for students that I think really works. And so suffering sells, I'll say. That's not quite right, but.
I had a professor at Boston College who many of us thought was the smartest person we ever met. He would answer questions like this, but holding his fork, because he hated to give an oversimplified cause, like to reduce a hard question to one cause. And he would sort of hold his head, think for a while, and he'd say, it all begins with Parmenides. And he'd go, my temptation is to sort of hold my head and say, it all went wrong with William of Amaco. And I tell the story from there. We are at, where we are in the story, I do not know. If we're in the end, the denouement, the beginning, the crisis, I don't know. But we're certainly part of a story which has, for many, many centuries now, wished to remove the substance of humanity and wished to remove the substance of virtue and vice, and to replace it with that which is constructed, either by human inclination, human will, convention of a particular group, and so on. For Occam, that's really that even God makes it up as he goes along, which nothing could be worse than that, as an undercutting of the coherence of a friendly and decent universe. If you're in your studies now and you haven't read figures like Lash and Bella and Reef, you really have to. They're not perfect, they have their problems, but they are trying to articulate something of the crisis of narcissism and the crisis of the therapeutic and the crisis of the officer elite class, which has lost the confidence in the story where there is substance to the universe and it is replaced merely with convention, but now we've become, rightfully so in many instances, so suspicious of the convention. We've unmasked so much of the hidden violence and special pleading, and racism and so on of the convention that we're left not with much more to go. Another person in the triumvirate of Lash, Bella, and Reef would be Del Noce. You ever read Augusto Del Noce? Especially Del Noce's argument about the kind of victory of a kind of cultural critique or cultural suspicion, which unmasked each and every of the foundations that we have in the tradition for claims of justice or dignity or decency, that unmasked all of those as being groundless. And then having lost the grounding ability to critique, to actually show why things are unjust, if the community went in one of two directions. Either an easy bourgeois acceptance of what the status quo was, oddly radical critique leads to a kind of social quietism or conservatism in the worst sort of sense of, it's what we have, it's what you have, you stick with it. Or it led to the conditions where the best lacked all conviction and the worst were full of passionate intensity, because what you have left is not argument for justice, grounds by which to make claims of injustice, so much as your passionate demand for things to be as you wish them to be. But oddly there, the radical critique of one community and the passive bougie acceptance of another community are both rooted in the same issue, which is the desire for things to be as they wish, rather than the desire to orient one's life to the substance of things as they are. So it seems to me that the cure, and obviously Fred at that point is going to say, Fred Lawrence, the professor, is going to say, there's 100 other causes, of course. But it seems to me if any of that story is true, and I think that his Dunn Fletcher defines the bourgeois, those who are satisfied with who they are but dissatisfied with what they have, if any of that story of the bourgeois is true, then one of the main practices for people like myself, and I assume many of us who are at such a conference, would be to firmly resist the bougie church, bourgeois church, and to recognize that the purpose of the church is not to bring comfort to those who simply would like to be comfortable with who they are and dissatisfied with what they have. And that the practices of the church are in fact deeply and utterly erotic, and the church is a deep hater of the bourgeois, as I've just defined it. Bourgeois virtues are fine, I suppose, in the McCloskey sense. It's nice to have insurance and healthcare and streets. But the bourgeois society, which assumes that the purpose of the society is to convince you that you're refined as you are, that you need more stuff, that needs to be replaced by a deeply more erotic church. My own children, whenever I describe things like this, my wife gives me angry looks, but she's not here, so I can say whatever I want. Right? One of the things that with my own children that we're trying to do, we would say this to them in these so many words, is to try and give them a more erotic education than the education of their friends and neighbors. That we want them to passionately desire and to recognize things which are beautiful and enticing and evocative and imaginative. That they learn to dance, not because dancing is satisfying for them or good exercise and good for their blood pressure, but because, as Eliot reminded us, that it really is a teaching in the erotics signifying matrimony, a commodious and dignified sacrament. Or that one studies art, and one studies architecture, and one studies poetry, because these are the forms by which we attain an erotic as opposed to the self-satisfied imagination. Or that there are some forms of music we do not listen to, and we pray we never have to worship to, because they are clearly inappropriate to the evoking of desire into proper direction. So could we be practices of the erotic, as Anna defined?
Thank you. All right, let's open it up. Questions from the audience for the panel? Yes.
I just want to say, this is a comment that, one of the philosophical bases made for sentimentalism is a whole bunch of trends of philosophy that we're seeing now. Philosophy, quote unquote, like existentialism, postmodernism, deconstructionism. You see all these as an attack on reason and objectivity itself. And I have colleagues, professors, who are postmodernist professors, and they think logic is a myth, essentially. So it's this attack on reason and objectivity that I think mathematically increases the overemphasis on sentiments. So you ask, like I ask my students who have strong beliefs, why do you believe in this? And they don't have any rational basis. They don't really know why they believe in certain things. So everything is feeling-based. And I think it's this attack on reason that is a big problem. It's attack on natural law or some type of immutable principles. So I think that's also just a comment on that.
My question, I don't know if it relates to the comment I had before, but because the speakers, and I include myself, you're a little older than the generation we're trying to address. Maybe 10 years, well, I don't know, 20, 30. I understand the rejection of sentimentalism as it has been understood up until recently, or as we understand it. But isn't there a risk that if we forget to say that there is something that is you're drawn to, and it's not only the charity, it's understanding that love is not exactly only an act of will, because I really would not agree with that. We can habituate, we can create, but we can be conducive, but there is something more. Like the risk, as we are dealing with, we're trying to, to understand how you educate. Then there is like the rejection we might have to a culture that we're the product of is being received by very young generation as that's all wrong. So nothing has to be like my heart's beating and I feel drawn by, like that would be wrong. I cannot be drawn to dancing with this person. I cannot be drawn to like, I don't want to be in this relationship. So it's, I'm getting closer, I think, to the comment I made before, but I don't know if you have had this thought while teaching or while addressing students that they might take it like too serious, like abandoning sentiment like in the wrong way.
Yeah, one thing when I'm teaching, I learned, when I started teaching, I learned fairly quickly that I wasn't there to inform my students, I was there to help them fall in love, right? I mean, if I weren't working on Augustine, I would be working on Plato, who understood love so well. And so it seems to me, to go back to what Professor Titus was saying, that so often, maybe even especially in the younger generation, there's this kind of reserve, like, I'm not going to let myself want too much, I'll be content with this reasonably good relationship, because there's all this anxiety about failure, right? And so as a teacher, it seems that one way of combating the sentimentalism is not to say you need to feel less or desire less. You very much need to let yourself desire more. You need to let yourself desire what you really want, which is the true, the good, and the beautiful, the kinds of things you're trying to help your children fall in love with. And so as a teacher, I think, my job is just to help students see where beauty lies, to help students see the beauty of the truth, and then sort of get out of the way and let that relationship unfold.
Because I think the Stoics are wrong and Thomas is right about the nature of the will, say that love is an act of the will. It's not a sort of, today I love, right? So you sort of write down in your planner, I love, and then at 10 o'clock you check in, I love, right? It's not the sort of pull yourself up by the bootstraps understanding, let alone just a sort of Stoic willing. Love is defined by Thomas as a rational appetite, the rational appetite. So it's rational because it can't not be rational because it's a faculty of the human being, and the human being is an intellectual being by nature, so all the faculties are informed by intellectuality. But it's an appetite because it's a desire for the good of the entirety of the person as opposed to the desire for this or that good, for this or that faculty, this or that appetite. It is the rational appetite or the desire for the good of the whole person. And so in many ways then, the training in reasonability for those who have been robbed of their cultural story and the practices and dances and songs and art and sacraments of their heritage is precisely to make their heart beat a little faster. If anything, their hearts aren't beating fast enough because the desire has been evacuated or rendered sterilized, safe in so many ways. It seems to me that one of the tasks of the church is to be really weird in its articulation of the goodness and danger of the love of God, as opposed to the sort of usual Sunday school class material, grade 1, God loves you, grade 2, God loves you, grade 3, God loves you, grade 3, I get it already, right? I'd actually like a more interesting God. One before whom I could dance and sing and be afraid, and in front of whom my lips would be unclean. One in front of whom my heart would beat fast. So that's more erotic. It's not that it's an absence of desire or emotion. It's the correction of the feeble or sots emotion, which is mere sentiment, which passes.
I hope I'm say things in order to be faster. But it seems we talk about young people, but when I maybe it was pretty bad already, right? When I started out at NYU, it was like almost an orgy there, right? And at least in the dorms, and what was available for what the university said, the city is our campus. And then when you go back a little more, and it's apparent in movies that there was certainly conventions, right? Christian conventions, right? Like you had sex after you were married. But in the movies, that wasn't happening. I mean, it was secret, like with Cary Grant, all those guys. They were fooling around. They weren't married, and there was no. It was already there. It was just that there was all these conventions left over from some kind of Christian belief in our society. So it seems to me that when we talk about this cure, how do we reverse this kind of sentimentality? I think we put a lot on ourselves as lay people in our classrooms, right, where we should be teaching grammar, Latin, Greek, whatever, higher philosophies, theology, whatever, literature, right? When you spend $60,000 to send your kids to these schools, but we do our best as lay people. But in what you guys do, what you were talking about, especially in your classes at Villanova and where you teach, but it seems to me that the bigger burden lies on the church and the churches, and that where they can learn beauty most is in the services, and whether if you're Catholic or Protestant, in the liturgies that are presented, that's where you can really penetrate people to experience having that erotic experience of music and true worship. And I think that's the beginning, but we're sorely lacking in that. But I think that's, we do our best as lay people, but I think that a bigger impact really is on the church to provide that for us. Just when you come in, you cross yourself and you kneel, you genuflect, you sit down, and it begins.
I'll just respond briefly. I mean, I think that sometimes when we make comments about the younger generation is going this way, and that wasn't like with us. There were problems when I was in college, there was problems when you were in college, but I do think that there's quite a lot of just general trend data about people not getting married, not having kids, and it does seem to be accelerating. The other thing I think which came up in most, or at least in a couple of the presentations, is that even if, let's say, it was the same in terms of the dysfunction, I think there are new phenomena for this generation. The primary one which came up is technology, and that comes up again and again and again in all of my classes and all of my encounters with students. And it's a difficult thing for me to respond to because I didn't grow up on it, and now they're doing this end ghosting campaign at Princeton University. I had to ask someone what ghosting is. Ghosting is when you have some kind of non-defined relationship with somebody and don't want to continue it, so you somehow demonstrate online that you're refusing to respond to them. Someone else can explain it better in a moment. But, for me, it was like I had to be explained by a student of mine that I was doing something wrong when I said bye-bye on text. He told me to stop. So this was Shantanu, telling me not to say bye on text. I was like, why not? Anyway, so I don't even understand this whole world of technology, but Evie will tell us about it briefly. But I think that that's an area in which, again, getting to the point about beauty, and that's why I think that the question of beauty and liturgy, young people are actually really just attracted to these different kinds of spaces where they're not being numbed by the Netflix stuff, but they're being lifted up in a kind of leisure that's contemplative and shared and beautiful, and I think that that's a way of attracting them away from the technology. Evie, I saw you.
Well, ghosting, I would say, is when somebody is romantically pursuing you or just pursuing you in friendship, and instead of politely declining something or just giving them a clear closure of some sort, you just disappear. You don't respond to the person, you don't. That's what it is. But I had a question about prudence and the cultivation of prudence as a virtue, because I found in my own experience, and also I think a lot of people, in thinking about love of various types, how to successfully love people, not that it's something that you can just win at, I guess, but a lot of us haven't had good models of just how to live a balanced lifestyle. It's easy to know, in some ways it's easy to know black and white,
one thing, which is that I think that the whole conversation around like work-life balance, I think is articulated in a very unhelpful way. As if there's a way that we could measure how much time I spend at work versus how much time I spend at home or doing these other things, it would get the balance right. It's sort of like a technological response to a problem that's fundamentally not technological. And so I think your articulation of virtue of prudence and having to cultivate the virtue of prudence is a really good response to that whole conversation around work-life balance, which really what it's asking is for you to develop that virtue of prudence to be able to spend the time that you spend doing the things that you love wisely, and to do that at your fullest ability in the different spheres of your life. And that's fundamentally cannot be measured, right? It has to be worked out in a particular day-to-day.
Could I just maybe put in a plug for the title of our conference in terms of answering that question? I think one of the key things that are quite often lacking in terms of the learning of right practical reason is recognizing that it happens in homes. And the primary that it happens in is with the family. It's a family modeling in various ways of talking about discerning, seeing the truth of the matter, seeing the directionality implications, seeing the choices to be made. But of course the families are important, their friends. So continuing from period of time on to key sources of discernment about what I'm going to do and how I'm going to consider my what about doing. So the community requires actually have a notion of what's needed to nurture the personal prudence. But I think these insights that there are these prudence groups, so we're talking about friends, we're talking about a group. More than one, two, and I think that's a key element in terms of what's going to be said today, in terms of the way that can be an extension of reason by looking to wisdom of the systems of the people who react to the labor of my fight, my classroom. And so putting a plug in for the pursuit of excellence through prudence and strategy.
An earlier person asked this question already, but I just want a little more. How would you respond to the statement that a significant portion of this education in terms of love and friendship should come through churches and religion?
Good question to ask at a seminary, huh? Yeah, well.
Can I ask, talk more about that question. What do you mean when you're asking that question?
So it seems like if what we've said is true about Aquinas, about charity and love being connected and from God, then it seems like the institutions and the systems that are supposedly most connected and most responsible for teaching that should also be the ones teaching about love and things connected to it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to build on Anna's question, about your question, I think there's different ways of addressing that, right? One way would be to think of the church as developing a curriculum on this topic. The other way to think of it, I think, might refer back to an earlier question, the church modeling through its theology, through its life and community, what love and friendship is. So I think, I would raise a question about whether or not, this has come up in some of the classes, in particular in the summer class that I teach, whether or not some of these virtues of prudence can be learned, but can they be taught as we think of like a school curriculum, right? I'm going to sit you down and teach you, I think in some ways, maybe we need a little bit of both, but so I'm not sure if you're talking about, is the church supposed to develop a curriculum to address this, or is the life of the church supposed to be a model, an exemplar, and through its theology, through its life and community, through its liturgy, be an exemplar of virtue and of love, and have behind those practices worked out theological, philosophical, coherent understanding of the person and of who God is that then infuses. But again, getting back to what I said about what's new today, and I think also for me, having been born and raised Catholic and having gone to Catholic schools and having two parents who were born and raised Catholic and went to Catholic schools, I take for granted how much knowledge was just imparted through my environment. And what I've learned with the young people that I'm teaching, often they might be here in the seminary or they might have been from Yale. Many of them were not raised in a Christian community or household. And there's often a desire for more explicit instruction about things which I was imparted simply through my family dynamics and my school and my parish. So I don't think we can presume anymore that a lot of people have not had these experiences growing up. And what this means to people who have entered the church from a background where their parents might have been Buddhist or they might have been atheist, and how to kind of go through the transition of thinking and behaving for them might be really different than for someone like me, for whom this was at least implicitly embedded in the practices and communities that had formed me.
So I guess let me restate my question to be more specific. I'm wondering if the church or wondering what you think of the church's current method of modeling love and modeling virtue, and whether or not that should be improved or whether or not that is adequate.
Is that a rhetorical question?
It wasn't meant to be, but the church has always been a group of awful people who are really good at sinning. Right? At the same time, the church is the ordinary means of salvation. And the practices of the church are the ordinary means by which the charity of God is infused in a person's life and works itself out in a progressive and quickening way until the fullness of all things. So if you think of a certain kind of architecture, one enters the narthex of the church, which is sort of the meeting place between the world, the flesh and the devil, and the church. And in order to walk in through the narthex into the nave, you pass the baptismal font. Because the baptismal font is the start of the narrative arc. End up at the front, right? And the front, of course, points upward and beyond itself. It has a vector to the transcendent, which is infused both here and points beyond it. So one, through the waters of baptism, gets the infusion of charity, which is the start of the path of an ongoing growth of charity and perfection, including constant need for repentance, not only of the individual but of the community, and the other means by which the community refreshes, restores, enlivens its people, right? Fraternal correction, the Eucharist, confession, marriage, holy orders, whatever it might be. Different churches will have different theologies about how to articulate those things, which can please the community. But that's what the church is. Just by definition, that is the nature that she is to provide the means of salvation, where salvation is nothing more than the infusion of the love of God in an ongoing progressive way so that one enters into eternal friendship and enjoyment with God as a participant in the love which God is. So if the church didn't do that, there is no such thing as the church. Now, does the church do that in a descriptive way? It's as it's always been.
Okay, I see a couple of hands, and then if you can try to be brief and we can wrap up with these last three hands that I saw. Okay.
This is probably directed a little bit more towards Dr. Titus, but you mentioned, and several of the speakers mentioned, kind of the relationship between sort of the social aspects of our life and the spiritual life. We're embodied souls. We have both the spiritual kind of learning virtues, morality, and growing in that, but also just the realities of mental illness and physiological maybe obstacles to forming relationships and empathy or putting yourself in vulnerable spaces. If you could just speak maybe more to, I don't want to say balance, but just that, I think on one end of the spectrum we tend to over-spiritualize things, that you just should pray more and do more acts of charity and penance and nutrition, but sometimes there's a real physiological difficulty of you have chemical imbalances and anxiety and depression and issues you might need to go see a medical professional for. I don't know, just to speak more of that. I know obviously we're talking very theologically, but
perfect sense, my response might not be as perfect as the question. But I think know yourself. In one sense, if we truly take to heart the goal of knowing oneself, it's going to be inadequate in an over-spiritualized or over-physicalized response. And modeling that we can do in various ways, we've got an institute that promotes from a Catholic perspective mental health has to take into consideration the spiritual, the ethical, and the psychosocial, physiological. And so, how does that come? How is that a task for each of us? To know ourselves and involved in the discernment every day, engaging with our life. What are the choices that are being made for my spiritual, ethical, psychosocial, physical? We don't say that. But we need to be aware that if we're neglecting part of our lives and our bodies fail, our spirit, we're making certain choices that our minds are distorted and their inclinations away from the love of God and away from the nature. Those signals come. But I think a balance, as Margarita mentioned, is necessary. It's a balance rooted in self-knowledge, but then also the knowledge of communities of friends, the church, hopefully, with the community of saints, the model for us. And it involves in various ways also that we will sometimes lay down our lives for our friends and say, okay, for the spiritual good of myself, I will do something that I realize I'm not sure what. And so those kind of choices are significant. And the base within I would call it have modeled the way that we have acquired virtues of excellence or balance. But at the same time, recognizing how there is to bring the call to an imbalance in order to serve the child to something. And the child's been able to sacrifice his need in order to live sacrificing his everything else. Balance, but open for the call.
Okay, last two questions here, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah.
One kind of a similar question that was asked and kind of with my account part of the solution, I guess. What a lot of people experience is that
Sorry, can you speak up just a little bit? It's hard to hear.
a lot of people experience that the practice of charity is very difficult, and it's kind of it's difficult enough to conceptualize it, but to actually practice it is even more. There's a sacramental life and Christian teaching and Christian life is a solution to that. But I love the kind of Pope Francis, he has this kind of motto or this mantra. It sounds very corporate, but it's actually very good. It's an encounter, like kind of cultural encounter. So I think that kind of be part of the solution of that is that kind of take a strange person and really look them in the eye and like the kind of love, the benevolence and the kind of love of God. It's just a common kind of.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, last comment goes to Ruby.
Perhaps on a similar note, I noticed in college and graduate school that much of the best relationship advice I received, and probably even more importantly, the encouragement to have hope in being able to move into marriage, for example, or really meaningful friendships, even as an adult, out of college, and so on, came from just meeting Christians who are doing this. And I think that part of reforming culture has to consist in exposing non-Christians to these people and doing so in some kind of ecumenical way that doesn't offend people's sensibilities when they don't share the beliefs just yet, but at least gives them a picture of, wow, here's somebody who is either a fellow young adult or somebody who's middle-aged, so relatively close to you in a generation, who has done it, who has a beautiful home that you can be welcomed into, or who can tell you about the proper signs of what to look for in dating or in male-female relationships that are
night when I spoke to the university graduate fellowship on campus that what I observed during my time at Yale would be that a lot of non-Christian or non-believing students were drawn to participate in communities of Christians simply because Christians modeled a kind of belonging and joy. And that I think that that's something that's uniquely done well, that Christians do typically well. So you don't always have to be inviting someone to a catechism class or to a liturgy, but to a fellowship where people are actually modeling love and joy and friendship, I think is attractive and raises questions that then might lead a person to want to understand the philosophy or the theology that motivates this group of people who know how to live in community and love each other and experience genuine joy. On that note, I will just say once again, thank you to the panelists, and I will once again plug the wonderful work being done by the Aquinas Institute, the Thomistic Institute, Scala. You know, I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for having been invited to participate with all of these wonderful educational institutes. And so all of you who are here, please take our flyers, check us out online. You can really get educated through Aquinas 101. I'm a big fan. And check out the videos on the Scala YouTube, and please come back for more. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you.